I want to start and read that little background information about Crispus Attucks because he kind of plays a pretty important role in this section. So just in case you didn't read that, at the top of 163, I want you to follow along on the One American Story. Okay, it says Crispus Attucks knew about the struggle for freedom. He was the son of an African-American father and a Native American mother. Attucks was born into slavery in Framingham, Massachusetts around 1723. As a young man, Attucks escaped by running away to sea. He spent the next 20 years as a sailor, working on whaling boats. To avoid recapture, he used a false name, calling himself Michael Johnson. In March 1770, Attucks found himself in Boston, where feelings against British rule were reaching a fever pitch. The words freedom and liberty seemed to be on everyone's lips. One night, Attucks heard a disturbance involving colonists and British troops decided to investigate. He had no idea that he was about to play a key role in American history, losing his life to a British bullet in a protest that came to be known as the Boston Massacre. So in this section, we're going to find out about the tension between Britain and the colonies and how that led to violence. So hopefully you read a little bit about Attucks and know that he was killed and was the first killed in the Boston Massacre. But before we get there, we have to kind of lead up to that, and we're going to start first and talk about the Townsend Acts, which are going to be found on 163 to a little bit to 164. All right, so get that down, Townsend Acts. And then we're going to take notes about this. So tell me, okay, remember the Stamp Act was repealed, and what replaced the Stamp Act? Garrett?
Declaratory Act.
The Declaratory Act. Basically, the Declaratory Act said we have complete authority over you. All right. Now, Britain still needed to raise money to pay its troops and still pay the debt from the French and Indian War and all the other expenses that happened while they were in America. Quartering Act was not working. Okay? So they decided to come up with a new way to raise these revenue, and they called it the Townsend Acts. All right, tell me some of the things under the Townsend Acts that, they placed upon the colonies. What did they do, these acts, Dylan?
They suspended New York's assembly until they agreed to house troops.
Okay, so that's one thing. The colonists had been not housing the troops. They weren't following the Quartering Act. And so they said, okay, we're going to suspend your assembly. You are not going to be allowed to meet with your groups, with your committees and whatnot, until you start housing the troops. All right? Okay, what else did it do? Dustin?
They were putting taxes on any various goods brought into the colonies, such as glass, paper, paint, lead, and tea.
Yep, any goods brought into the colonies, and we'll go ahead and go with imported goods from Britain. And those would be glass, paper, lead, tea, anything that was brought into the colonies, they put a tax on. So they collected those taxes and used them to pay, are you getting this down? Did you get the note, all the notes? And make sure, these are the notes, so even if you have the vocabulary definition, we're still taking the notes. Okay. So how were they going to enforce these acts to make sure that, that they were housing soldiers and that the taxes were being placed on the imported goods? What were they using to make sure that this was being enforced? Garrett?
They made sure they had British governors and other officials in the colonies.
They made sure there were other officials, different types of governors from Britain there in the colonies, and be even more specific, what did these officials that were there do to make sure that, things were taking place? Dustin?
British officers used the rights of assistance.
Writs.
Writs of assistance, and it was like a search warrant.
Good.
And
So,
you could go and check out your house.
yeah, so they flip it over to 164, the top there. The British enforced this by passing these writs of assistance. And basically what a writ of assistance is it is a search warrant. So they would go from home to home and say, we have a search warrant, we're coming in to make sure that you've paid your taxes on the goods that have been imported, we're going to make sure that you're housing the the soldiers that you're supposed to do. So that kind of upset the colonists. Why do you think they would be upset about these search warrants? Why would you think they would be upset, Eli?
Because it's invading their space.
It's invading their space, their privacy. These people are just able to come in their home and ransack it, looking for certain things that they shouldn't have, or making sure they're paying taxes. Dylan?
They probably had stuff before they made the act.
Okay.
They didn't pay taxes on, and they're gonna make them pay taxes on.
Okay, that's another thought as well. Some of the money raised on taxes was used to pay these governors and these officials that were brought here from Britain, okay, besides paying back the debt and other things, but that's what the money was. So they weren't happy that they were having to pay salaries of these British soldiers. You can imagine they would be not happy. So, another thing to add to them being upset about how Britain is controlling them. So make sure you're on 164, and let's talk a little bit about now what they do. Protesting. As soon as these Townsend Acts were passed, immediately people started bashing them. Okay, they would put posters up throughout town. They would put things in the newspaper. Protests were just being done all throughout the colonies. Okay, why were they protesting? What were they so upset about? What did they say these acts were doing? Did you raise your hand up? Sort of. What were they upset about? Noah?
They were angry that their elected assembly was suspended.
Right, they were upset that their assembly was suspended. They were upset about the writs of assistance. They were upset about having to pay taxes. And what did they say this stuff did to them? Garrett?
Well, I was just going to say what John Dickinson said.
Go for it.
Alright, so he said the issue whether Parliament can legally take money out of our pockets without our consent. So they were worried about them taking, Parliament taking money from them.
Right. Okay, and going along with Dickinson, James Otis kind of agreed with Dickinson and kind of put it another way. And what did James Otis say?
That it went against their natural rights.
Yeah. Otis says what they are doing, these search warrants, telling us we can't meet, those are our natural rights that every single person has. And remember, those rights were talked about during the Enlightenment period. Life, liberty, health, those things are your natural rights and nobody can go against. Zach?
Yeah, I was going to say that John Locke said during the Enlightenment, no one ought to harm another person in his life, liberty, health, or possessions.
Exactly.
He
And
did more than half of that.
yep, and that's exactly what they felt that Britain was doing, was going against their rights and their freedoms. Okay? So they're not too happy about this. Okay? So they decided, okay, we're going to do some other types of protests. Now, who's the leader of the Sons of Liberty? Remember the Sons of Liberty that you talked about last section, I believe, the secret society? Brownlee, who's the leader of that group? Okay, keep thinking and look on 164 while you're thinking. No? Logan? Samuel Adams. He's the leader of the Sons of Liberty. And he announced a type of a protest that he wanted the colonists to do because of the tax on the imported goods. And what did he tell people? This is what I think we should do. Garrett?
Boycott.
He said, okay, we need to boycott. We need to boycott all British goods. That way we don't have to pay their silly taxes. They also pressured anybody that owned a shop, do not sell British goods. So, most of their goods came from Britain. What do you do if you're in the middle of a boycott? And it's a serious boycott. It's not like, well, I'll go over and get something anyway. What do you do? What do you have to do? You need this stuff. coming in, but now you're boycotting, you're not going to the shop because they're not selling it, you're not buying it. Drew, what do you do?
They made women make most of their goods.
Yeah, they started women making goods. What else, Drew? Or is that all you had?
That's all I have.
Okay, then they kind of organized this group called the Daughters of Liberty, who would start to make clothing. And to make the clothing, they would use American products to make this. Okay, they were starting to encourage people to create their own products within America, and using all American goods, so they didn't have to buy British goods. Makes sense, because if they have to buy British goods, they're paying a tax, which they don't get anything to do with the tax, and they thought that was not fair. Okay? So people are upset about this. Other than the fact that they're boycotting, what other types of things are they doing to try to get things through? Because remember, if you have ships coming in, you've got these custom officials who are stopping here and checking everything on your ship. What else are they doing to try to get things into the colonies? Zach?
And I know in the local, in the Boston Gazette, they said that they were asking calm mob.
But they were trying to get people, they didn't want people to have mobs. So the boycott was good, but they didn't want people to have mobs. They didn't want them to harm the custom officials. But there was a riot because the custom officials, has to do with the merchant ship Liberty. And what was happening with this ship? Garrett?
The ship was smuggling stolen wines,
Mm-hmm.
and after this was seized, there was riots, which caused the customs officials to flee, and of course Samuel Adams, being who he was, decided to take this as an opportunity to quote, "We will destroy every soldier that dares put his foot on shore. I look upon them as foreign enemies."
Very good. So the British tried to seize this ship, which was carrying smuggled wine. A riot breaks out, and then they have to bring more troops over. And yes, that's when Samuel Adams says, any British soldier that comes here, watch out. They are foreign to us. Okay, so he is a huge leader in the fight against Britain. Zach.
Who won that riot?
It depends on how you look at it. I mean, mostly the colonists, because they were able to, cause this riot that forced the British to bring even more troops over.
Which could be looked at as a negative.
Which, yes.
as well.
So, because of these riots, now you have more soldiers from Britain coming over. Okay? So, make sure you're taking a look at page 165. Hi. This is when it starts to get interesting. So, in 1768, because of those riots that were taking place, 1,000 more British soldiers arrived. Okay, and now we start to call these soldiers the Redcoats, and it's obvious, but why are we calling them the Redcoats?
Because they're
Or
army
lobsterbacks.
uniforms.
We call them Redcoats because of their coats being red, or lobsterbacks because of, they look like lobsters with their red jackets and stuff. They yell at them, call them different types of names that have to do with lobsters. So we've got these new troops that are coming in. They arrive in Boston. They're under the control of a guy by the name of Thomas Gage. And when they arrive, what is the feeling in Boston when 1,000 more troops arrive, Dylan?
Tension fills the streets.
Yes, tension fills the streets. And this tension that fills the streets is eventually going to break into violence. Because the soldiers that show up, are they being paid very well by Britain? They are not being paid well. So, what do they do since they don't make much money? What do the British soldiers do because they don't make much money, Dustin?
They hire themselves out as workers.
Yeah. They hire themselves out to Americans, and they hire themselves out at rates lower than what an American would work. So, Drake is a British soldier, Page is a colonist, Hundley's the business owner. Page tells Hundley she'll work for $5 an hour. Well, here comes little Drake the Redcoat coming in and telling Hundley, I'll work for $2 an hour. Who will Hundley hire?
If he's a good businessman.
If he's a good businessman, he's gonna hire Drake. If he's loyal, he will hire Paige. But